What is poppin' YouTube? Back again with another video. Today we're doing my start sit running backs for week 1. Super exciting to be putting out each and every matchup for you here today. So let's go. So starting off with the Thursday night game, we have the Lions and we have the Chiefs. With this matchup, of course, Travis Kelce is going to be out. On the fringe, we have Isaiah Pacheco. It's hard for me to know with Isaiah Pacheco if you're supposed to start him this week, if you're supposed to bench him this week, because where you were drafting him, if you have two very much so secure running backs, I'm starting those secure running backs over Isaiah Pacheco. If you have some interesting decisions, let me know down below. But I'm definitely sitting Jerick McKinnon and CH. There's no reason to start those guys at all. But moving on to the Detroit Lions, it's a little bit more interesting. Jahmyr Gibbs, he was like a third-round pick. As much as he is the rookie, and you might be worried about starting him, like saying, like, hey, Caleb, I need to see it before I put him in. Don't do that. Put Jahmyr Gibbs in. And on the fringe, we got David Montgomery. David Montgomery is replacing Jamal Williams, who had 20 total touchdowns last season. So we potentially could be seeing David Montgomery get 1-2 touchdowns. We could see Jahmyr Gibbs get 1-2 touchdowns. I just don't know. So I'm a little bit hesitant on David Montgomery. Let us see it in the first week before putting him in. Moving on to our early Sunday slate, we have the Atlanta Falcons and we have the Carolina Panthers. Of course, you're starting Miles Sanders. Like, start the guy. He got paid the money. He's going to be a 3-down bell cow this week against the Atlanta Falcons. And then we got the Atlanta Falcons, who were the second most rushing attempt team last season. And so you have the hard decision between Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. And I'll be completely honest with you, I am going to be starting Bijan Robinson. You drafted him in the first round. You have to. But on the fringe is Tyler Algier, because I think there's going to be enough volume in this Atlanta Falcons running attack with maybe the lack of passing attempts and Desmond Ritter's first start for both of these guys to see decent fantasy football production. I don't think it's going to be Bijan Robinson's best game by any means in his rookie season, but it's enough for me to be taking Bijan Robinson here to start versus the Panthers. Moving on to our next game, we have the Texans versus the Ravens. So I am, of course, starting Dameon Pierce. We've heard all the reports from camp of him potentially being a bell cow. A lot of people are high on Devin Singletary. I would sit Devin Singletary this week, as they are playing a very hard defense in the Baltimore Ravens. On the Ravens side, I'm starting J.K. Dobbins, even though, like we've been saying, we don't think the receiving upside is going to be high this year. Maybe that proves us wrong, and we're definitely sitting Gus Edwards. There's no reason to be starting Gus Edwards this week. Moving on to another AFC division game, we have the Bengals versus the Browns. You're starting Joe Mixon. You're starting Nick Chubb. We talked about it a few days ago when we just said that this was going to be an absolute shootout. These division games, there's always just a little bit extra animosity between the teams. And so Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, you drafted them both in the top 4 rounds. You are starting both of these bad boys. Moving on to our next game, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Indianapolis Colts. We're just going to say this right now. The Colts situation with no Jonathan Taylor, running back by committee, Evan Hall, Deion Jackson, Zach Moss, don't start any of those bad boys. We do not know who it's going to be, because we saw last season, Zach Moss gets in there, gets 18 carries, only 3 yards per carry. He only ends up with like 50 yards for 18 carries. Deion Jackson, he might be the most explosive, but he like never gets in the game in these situations. Evan Hall, we don't know what he's going to do. Then moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. There's just so many mouths to feed in this offense. Of course, we're going to be starting Travis Etienne because you drafted him high. He's healthy. We're going to be sitting Tank Bigsby this week, and I'm a huge Tank fan. But until we see what these splits are going to be, it's a little bit hard for me to project Tank Bigsby out this week, so we will be sitting Tank Bigsby. Moving on to the Buccaneers versus the 49ers. Of course, the Buccaneers with Rachaad White, Sean Tucker. We are going to be sitting Sean Tucker. We will be starting Rachaad White. Like the matchup here for the Buccaneers, Rachaad White's going to be getting a ton of volume. Moving on to the Minnesota Vikings, we're going to be starting Alexander Mattison. The hype has been there all offseason for Alexander Mattison. Like we've been saying, as much as the Vikings are a heavy pass attempt team, if they are a top 8-7 offense this season, Alexander Mattison is going to get a ton of scoring opportunities in the red zone. We will be sitting Ty Chandler, be sitting Myles Gaskin. No reason to be starting those guys this week. Moving on to our next game, we have the Titans versus the Saints. We, of course, will be starting the king, the man, the myth, the legend, Derrick Henry. No, we will not be starting Tajay Spears. No ACLs. There's no reason to start him this week until Derrick Henry proves that he can't be handling an 80 to 90% workload. Derrick Henry will be in these start-sit videos each and every week. But moving on to the New Orleans Saints, Alvin Kamara is suspended, so we got 2 options here. We got Kendre Miller and we have Jamal Williams. If I had to start one, I would be starting Jamal Williams. I'm not starting Kendre Miller. Like we were saying, these rookie running backs, it takes them a little bit while to overtake their older counterparts in these NFL offenses. So I am waiting a little bit on our boy Kendre Miller. We will be starting Jamal Williams. I don't think the same expectations of him getting 20 total touchdowns this season are on the table. He could potentially be a sneaky option in the flex. Then we go to the San Francisco 49ers versus the Steelers. We are starting Najee Harris for the Steelers. We're sitting Jaylen Warren, but Jaylen Warren, sneaky stash. So if you need a stash for later on in the season, Jaylen Warren could definitely be it. Then on the 49ers, we're starting CMC. We're sitting Elijah Mitchell. It's easy for us to really project and look at Elijah Mitchell and say, hey, we haven't seen the splits necessarily with him and CMC only for a few games before Elijah Mitchell got injured. We need to see it. And if CMC, I know they've talked about potentially using CMC less. So if they use him less, then maybe Elijah Mitchell becomes a sneaky flex play later on in the season. But I am not starting Elijah Mitchell this week versus the Steelers. Next game we have is the Cardinals versus the Commanders. We're starting James Conner. We saw the splits. What happens when James Conner is with Kyler Murray, and when he's without Kyler Murray, James Conner becomes an absolute bell cow. So we will be starting James Conner. We're going to be sitting Keontae Ingram. Keontae, sorry, my guy, not be starting this week. Then we move on to the fringe. We have the Washington Commanders backfield. We have two guys, Antonio Gibson, Brian Robinson. As much as I think Antonio Gibson has the higher upside because in PPR, he's going to be the receiving down back. Brian Robinson, he is the plotter. He's the first and second down ball carrier. So Brian Robinson could potentially be an interesting one here in this matchup. Just depends on what your depth is looking on your team. Hopefully you don't have to start either of these guys, but if you had to choose one between Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson, I'm choosing Antonio Gibson. Then we move on to the Packers and Bears game. The Bears offense, I think, is similar to me as the Colts, where I like Khalil Herbert. He's a fringe play, and if you drafted him as your RB2, you're probably throwing him in there, but we don't know what those splits are going to look like between him and Roschon Johnson or even Deontay Foreman, and so I'm just a little bit hesitant on Khalil Herbert this week. We are not worried about the Packers offense at all because we know Aaron Jones has put up solid RB1 production the last 2 seasons. No reason to think that's going to stop. So we're starting Aaron Jones this week versus the Bears. We're going to be sitting AJ Dillon though. We need to sit AJ Dillon because we always say, oh, AJ Dillon has the touchdown upside, but do the Packers have touchdown upside? That is still TBD. That is why I'm just holding the horses a little bit here on the Packers versus Bears. Moving on to the Raiders versus the Broncos. Of course, you're starting Josh Jacobs, signed that big contract extension, drafted him in the first 3 rounds, probably in the first 2 rounds. So we're starting Josh Jacobs. Then the Broncos, it's on the fringe. Javonte Williams recovering first game off that ACL. Then we got Samaje Perine also. So I'm actually going to be sitting Samaje Perine. I'm going to be, if you really need to start Javonte Williams, like throw him in there. I'm not expecting much. I'm only expecting 10 total touches for Javonte Williams. So that is what I would be doing for them. Moving on to the Dolphins versus the Chargers. Of course, the Dolphins, you're going to be starting Raheem Mostert this week, like in the flex. That's what I would be doing with Raheem Mostert. I would sit Devon Achane as much as I've got a whole lot of Devon Achane. I would be sitting Devon Achane this week. And then, of course, you're starting Austin Eckler. First round running back. No reason not to start him in this high-powered AFC showdown. I think it's going to be a lot of scoring, and which is going to bode well for Austin Eckler for touchdown upside as well as Raheem Mostert. The next game we have the Eagles versus the Patriots. When we look at this game, the fringe, we've been in on DeAndre Swift in this backfield. But if I had a better option than DeAndre Swift, I would not be starting DeAndre Swift this week. So fringe. That's why I have him here. But I'm sitting Kenneth Gainwell. I'm sitting Rashad Penny. No reason to start those guys. Then we're looking at the Patriots. I'm starting Ramondre Stevenson. I'm not worried about Zeke coming in. I mean, I am with the touchdown upside, but it's not like Ramondre Stevenson was scoring a whole lot of touchdowns last season anyway. Only had 6 total touchdowns on the season. So we're going to be sitting Zeke though, because like I said, we need to see how this Patriots offense looks. Is it even doable? Is there any hope that Zeke will have the touchdown upside on a week-to-week basis? He could be a sneaky flex play later on, but for this week, I'm definitely sitting Zeke Elliott. Moving on to our next game, we have the Seattle Seahawks versus the LA Rams. I'm starting Kenneth Walker because we saw what he could do last season. Probably starting Zach Charbonnet if I have a flex spot that I'm a little bit iffy about. But let me know down below what that might be if you have Zach Charbonnet, because it just depends on like if there's a better wide receiver option for you. But I do like Zach Charbonnet this week because I think the Seattle Seahawks are going to get up early on the LA Rams without Cooper Kupp with their lack of defense. And so definitely Zach Charbonnet potentially is also going to be a start for me this week. In the fringe, we have Cam Akers for the LA Rams. Are the Rams going to be able to get anything going on offense without Cooper Kupp, with Matthew Stafford not being able to be super mobile? That's something to consider. And then Kyren Williams is definitely going to be a sit for me. We're not starting anybody other than Cam Akers this week for the Rams offense. Moving on to our next game, we have the Cowboys versus the Giants. We are starting Tony Pollard. We are starting Saquon Barkley. No one else. Those are going to be the main primarily ball carriers. Drafted these guys in the first 2 rounds. No reason not to start either of these guys. Then we're moving on to our next game. We have the Buffalo Bills versus the New York Jets. We like both of these teams. It's going to be a high-scoring game. We're starting James Cook. I've been in on James Cook all season. If he burns me in week 1, I'm so sorry, but I'm starting James Cook. I'm personally starting James Cook, so take that as my personal vendetta. We will be sitting Damian Harris until we see Damian Harris start to become an absolute touchdown monster machine. He will be on my bench, even though I think he's a really great depth piece. Moving on to the Jets, we are on the fringe. We're fringely starting Dalvin Cook. I think both of these guys, Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook, got Breece Hall off the ACL injury. I would imagine they only give him 8 to 10 touches. I think Dalvin Cook potentially has a higher touchdown upside. If I had the option not to start either of them, I wouldn't start either of them. But if you had to choose between Dalvin Cook and Breece Hall, sure, I'll throw Dalvin Cook in there if I really, really, really need to. So those were all my start sits for the week 1 matchups. Let me know down below what questions you have. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're helping you win some fantasy football championships in 2023 fantasy football. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.